Hi everyone. Welcome to the Strand. I say this every time and everyone rolls their eyes when I say, okay, we're 85 years old and still independent, and I'm Jessica Strand, and no, I am not related to the bookstore. The Bass family that still owns this bookstore. And I'm the events director, and I'm thrilled to introduce author, pastry chef, and teacher, Alice Medrich. Medrich started her career with a handwritten recipe from her Parisian landlady, her small cocoa-dusted truffle. The recipe traveled from Paris to California, where Alice popularized the chocolate truffle and opened her own chocolate dessert shop, Cookbook. Since selling Cookbook in '89, she's been consulting, writing, and teaching across the country. She has 9 books to her name and has won numerous awards for her work. Tonight she will discuss her latest creation, sinfully easy, delicious dessert, which we have samples of over here, with food and wine editor Daniel Gritzer. The two will talk sweets, chocolate, and hopefully much more. Please join me in welcoming Alice Medrich and Daniel Gritzer.
Well, one place to start might be this chocolate truffle story. I was curious where your interest in chocolate began. Did you begin with that experience with Jessica?
My interest in chocolate began because I grew up with Hershey bars and M&Ms, and in my family these were legitimate treats. Not abused, but they were certainly part of what was associated with everything from anything with a Hershey bar. We shared a Hershey bar, but I might have that with him because that's what he liked the best.
Alice,
yeah.
can you speak into the microphone?
Oh, where is the microphone?
Down here below your chocolate.
So, okay, that's better. Thank you. So the story, me and chocolate starts with growing up on Hershey bars and M&Ms, which were a legitimate treat in my family. Not ever considered junk food, never abused, but always enjoyed.
And now we were talking on the side about this just unbelievable array of single origin chocolate, percentage chocolates, craft, artisan chocolates. How is that influencing your work now? Do you incorporate some of those products into your baking, or?
Oh, enormously and always. In spite of growing up on that Hershey milk chocolate, my career did start out with bittersweet chocolate, so I've always been looking for chocolate that has less sugar and is more interesting. Fortunately, in the last, say, starting around 20 and 10 years ago, we started to catch up with the European idea that chocolate wasn't just candy, not just a generic flavor for something sweet. And in specific, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, we just started to realize that chocolate, the cocoa beans that chocolate is made from, are really more like wine grapes or coffee beans. They come from a place, and that place determines in part, how those beans can taste. And we began to get a sense that chocolate makers are actually making decisions about blending or not blending to bring out these different flavors. And we began to realize that chocolate isn't just one flavor anymore. And so that renewed my interest in chocolate enormously and resulted in a book called Bittersweet that came out in 2002. It talks quite a bit about that.
Do you have some of those brands are obviously very pricey. Do you have some favorites that you work with now, or what's in your?
I'm a big fan of Chocolate Chocolate. I have been since their inception in '97. They started out as 2 guys with an idea. I was quite friendly with them then, and was their first kind of casual consultant, and then kind of a real consultant. And so I watched that brand grow from a little, micro kind of company to something that's now owned by a great big company. But since then, and I think really because of them, there are now hundreds of little craft chocolate makers in little garages and little tiny spaces, really putting the lie to the old idea that to manufacture chocolate, you had to have enormous equipment, enormous capital investment. So now it's just like a little bit like all the little craft brewers and the little coffee roasters, and all of that makes it way more interesting. And turns chocolate more into an interesting food rather than this generic candy ingredient.
Right.
One thing I remember about living in France way back in the early 70s was that if you wanted candy, you would go to the confiserie and get candy. The word for chocolate wasn't the same word for candy. You'd go to the chocolate, you'd go and buy chocolates on the one hand, or you'd go and buy candy, and it wasn't the same thing. So when I started my business, when I started making chocolate truffles in California way back then, one of the first things I insisted that my staff never do was to call the chocolate truffle candy. So that distinction that a chocolate truffle is made of the same things that we make dessert. A good chocolate truffle is made with exactly the same ingredients that we make a dessert with. You know, fresh butter, cream, nuts, all of those things. Not an abundance of sugar, and not all of the. It's not about sugar. It's about the chocolate. It's about purity. It's about freshness. So a chocolate truffle, a really good one, that doesn't have a shelf life of 6 months or 8 months or 3 years, is like a tiny miniature dessert, and it is a totally separate thing than a piece of candy.
I noticed in the back of your new book that you have a recipe for your chocolate truffle, but it's updated.
It is updated.
So I was curious a little bit about that evolution, and that's sort of going to segue into another thing I want to talk to you about.
The recipe for chocolate truffles that I started with from my landlady was really not a commercial recipe at all. It was a homemade recipe made by a little old lady in Paris, and it was most of us are familiar with chocolate truffles being made of chocolate and cream, right? Ganache, we know that word now. 10 years ago, hardly anyone did. This truffle from Madame Listel was made with chocolate and butter and egg yolks. Sort of like a chocolate mousse, but way more condensed and intense. And it was dusted with cocoa instead of dipped. And it was this wonderful, tiny, little, intense, bittersweet experience. The only other person that I know that has a recipe similar to that is an old French guy. I shouldn't say Jacques Pepin is an older gentleman who happens to be French. He's the only other person I know who has a recipe for chocolate, or knows about chocolate truffles with egg yolks. So it was a very homemade kind of thing. And that's the recipe we started with. And in those days, it was simply made by melting the chocolate with a little bit of water and tossing in the egg yolk and stirring it up. Oh, butter, there's butter in there. Tossing it in the egg yolk and stirring it up and letting it set and then scooping it into little balls and rolling it in the cocoa. And that's what I sold at my shop for a long, long time, along with some bigger, more ganache-style chocolate truffles. But at that point in time when egg yolks became a problem, when raw eggs became a problem here, I needed to reinvent it. So I reinvented it the first time by managing to pull the water out of the recipe and use it to heat the egg yolk without curdling it to 160 degrees so it would be safe, and then reincorporate it. So it complicated things a little bit, but it tasted like the same truffle, and it had the exact same ingredients, only worked in a different way, which is something I love. I mean, I love that, all that fiddling and redoing and approaching things differently. So that's really neat to reinvent that. And so for this most recent book, Simply Easy, I figured out a way to do that heating of egg yolks in an easier way for a home cook. And while I was at it, I threw it all into Cuisinart and came out with a whole different texture, still with the exact same ingredients, just treated a little differently. So I love to revisit something and turn it into something else. Sometimes the ingredients stay exactly the same, but the method changes and the results are different. Can I answer that question?
You absolutely did, and I hope this doesn't get too insider baseball, but Alice and I are working on a story now for the November issue of Food and Wine on perfecting pie crust, which is sometimes an intimidating baking challenge. And I'd never worked with Alice before, and so when we knew that we wanted to do this story, and we were trying to figure out who the best person was, and Alice's name came up, and everybody was, oh my God, I love Alice. Oh my, Alice is this. I love Alice. I love Alice. It's okay, great. So I called Alice up and I told her what the idea was, and the deadline was fairly tight, but she agreed to do it anyway, which was great. And I very quickly started to realize why everyone loved her so much. And it's, you have this thoroughness in anything you approach. I mean, I'm sure that these were not the first pie crusts you had ever baked.
It sounded like it, though, didn't it?
Well, you approached it as if maybe it were the first time you were baking pie crust, which you have a reputation for recipes that work, and I was starting to understand why. And actually printed out just one email. No, it's not. It's nothing embarrassing. It's just it's sort of a window into your process, which I'm curious about. Just how insanely thorough she was, which is amazing because I work with great chefs and cookbook authors all the time, and they often have great recipes. They often work. Sometimes they don't. But this is on a different level, and it's great for us because it makes our jobs easier and it makes it better end product. So she wrote to me and she said, this is one day out of several weeks. So I'm reviewing what I know and thought I knew about fat, flour, liquid, and method. I have 8 samples on the counter, all pretty good and very flaky, but some are better and more tender than others. And one stands out. I use the exact same amounts by weight of butter, flour, water, and salt each time. Even when the dough seemed to want more water, I held the amount constant for now. Isolating method to find out what works best. My theory is that method is more critical than choice of liquid or fat. When method is good, even precision of measurement might not be critically important. I mean, this is like, you were going deep, which is awesome. And that's what we were asking for. Was like, to ask for the perfect pie crust, a lot of bakers or pastry chefs would have sent their trusted recipe and left it at that. But you were playing with, every variable imaginable. The type of, how many times did you test it? Oh yeah.
I think that what interests me about this, aside from making things taste good, which interests me very much, is that I really like to answer a question that I might have, and answering the question usually raises some other questions, and I have a hard time stopping.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in fact, as I told you, it's been a while since I made a pie crust,
Mm-hmm.
and I really don't major in pie crust these days. So I really felt like I had to ask those questions for myself, because we're going to do this thing, and it's going to have your name on it, and it's going to have my name on it, and we want it to be good.
So, is for the number of books you've produced, it must just be to do any cookbook's a mammoth undertaking, but you clearly spend a tremendous amount of time with each recipe to get it. What's your process like? How do you start? What's the starting point in terms of coming up with the recipe idea and then getting it to where you want it to be?
Ooh, I'm not sure. The starting points can be all different. Sometimes it's a generic recipe that I know. Let's have a snickerdoodle, or let's have chocolate pudding. And if I haven't done anything like that, if I already don't have a starting point of my own, I actually sometimes will look at 10 or 12 recipes. I've been known to make a little spreadsheet just to see what the range of different ratios of things are, and then I might try one at either end of the spectrum to see what direction this is just one way. Not everything goes through this, but just to see whether I like it with a ton of butter, or look, this recipe has, some people do it with a ton of butter and some people do it with a ton of chocolate, and what's the difference in outcome? So I might want to test those two extremes to see what I really like, and then I start creating one for myself based on some of that information. So sometimes it's just looking at the field and finding my way in it. We were talking earlier about a new project. I really love to work with an ingredient that's unfamiliar to me, and one that hasn't been thoroughly, that is also unfamiliar to others. So there isn't already a track record from 8 chefs or 25 or 100 chefs, so that I can approach it without total mindset. I love that. Or I can say, okay, what is this stuff? And what would I do with it? Or what might I do with it? I love that, the sort of blank slate starting point. So there's all different ways for me to get in. And then there's that one that you just read, where you take the variables and look at all the different ways that
You can modify that.
Yeah.
And what's the point of, I feel good about where this is, I can, at the very least, put it down for publication, even if I revisit it, like the truffle.
I actually am trying to learn to stop sooner. Stop asking questions sooner, you know. It's got to taste good, you know, be reproducible.
Are there any discoveries, starting with an unfamiliar ingredient first, are you announcing publicly what the new book is, or is that?
Not so much now,
Oh.
but I mean, a good example of this is in you know, maybe 12 or so years ago, 15 years ago, when charcoal chocolate was just starting, I was very, very involved in that process. Not doing it, but hanging out with them, let's say, talking to them, tasting what they were doing. I had the first opportunity to taste the roasted cocoa beans, the cacao nibs, which almost everybody is now familiar with who likes chocolate, but at that time, were not on the market here, and most people didn't know what a cocoa bean was in the first place, much less that you could eat or bake with or have access to these little pieces of roasted bean. They were doing it in Europe, they weren't doing it here. So I get a handful of these and I say, aha, here is a new form of chocolate, what fun this is to play with. And I did a whole, you know, I did probably months between my assistant, my friend, and myself, so much so that my assistant used to, at one point, she would say to her husband, would you taste this? And he would say, if that's got nibs in it, I'm not eating more of that. So lots and lots of experimentation with nibs to figure out what they do and what they don't do and what I like and, you know, what can be done with them. And fortunately, I was also able to convince Charcuterie to sell them because there was no point in having this whole bank of recipes and an article that I wrote. No one could get them. So it resulted in them putting them for sale. Now many companies do that. You can buy them, and it's a chocolate ingredient that's available to people. But I had the fun of exploring it without any, you know, preconceived notions. Love that.
It's funny. It makes me think of the chocolate truffle you're credited with introducing to the U.S. and now it sounds like the cocoa nib, at least in terms of making it commercially available, we can thank you for as well.
You're welcome. Just say you're welcome. Okay,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just say
My
thank you. Well then with the cookbook that's out now, the latest one, given your fascination with asking these questions and solving these puzzles of perfect ratios and what gets you, this is more focused on these simpler desserts. So what led you to that, and how did that?
I've done a lot of books. This is book number 8 or 9, depending on how you want to count them. And since I started with a book that came directly out of my business, where the desserts were professional pastry chef quality, I've actually been working towards the simpler. After I sold that business, I found that all the work I was doing was at home, and I didn't have this giant bakery, and I didn't have all these people preparing all the subparts that you needed to create a really elaborate classic dessert. And it occurred to me that most people didn't have that either. And so I've been working simpler and simpler all along. But with Simply Easy Delicious Desserts, which is the new title, I suddenly realized that there were a lot of people out there who not only wanted simple desserts, but people who were comfortable and loved to cook, but a little afraid of baking. So that was the hook. I mean, I know a lot of these people. My editor is one of these people. There are thousands of you out there who are really comfortable with food, savory food, sort of like the give and take of throw in a little of this, taste and adjust that, don't measure precisely because you don't have to, you know what you're doing, but who just don't want to fiddle with the equipment, don't want to measure precisely, don't want to worry about all the chemistries applied in baking. And I thought, okay, a collection of recipes that go together more with that mindset that you approach cooking, simple cooking. Taste and adjust, not too much precise measuring, minimum of baking, and whatever baking is in there should be pretty easy to do, quick. Not dumbed down necessarily, but a lot of good ideas, modern flavors, some comfort food. So it was a challenge for me because I don't think that way, because I love complexity, I love accuracy, I love all these things. But so it was, the challenge then was for me to think different, as people say, think different. Think different.
Do you have either from that dessert or when you're entertaining, do you have a go-to, a fallback that you?
I'm embarrassed to say I'm a big fan of ice cream with chocolate sauce because everybody loves it. That being said, in the Simply Easy book, I do have some sauces because I think that people lose track of the fact that you can make a chocolate sauce better than anything you can buy and quicker than it takes to go out and buy that jar, and certainly less expensive. So I'm a big believer in having a signature house chocolate sauce or two, and knowing that you can make a caramel sauce really easily, having those kinds of things. Because good chocolate sauce on store-bought ice cream is divine. Add some strawberries. But also other sauces are the most things to do. What was the question? I love desserts that start with ice cream. Some of them, go beyond the ice cream chocolate sauce. I love the idea that you can make ice cream without an ice cream maker.
Yeah, I saw that in the book.
Art and the still freeze and the scoop. Sort of rustic ice creams with great flavors. I like desserts that can go together, like we put together a composed salad, so that there are a lot of recipes in the book where once you've made that dessert, you never have to open the web page again because you have it. You know that it's a section of oranges and orange juice and a little orange flour, water, and some dates and some almonds. And you do the variations on that, and it's a soup plate. It's slurpy, and you can add ice cream to it, and so forth and so on. So it's that cooking mindset.
And I'm curious, in your experience, is there something that you still wish you could change with the home baker? Is there
Yes.
one thing that...
Weights. I think that, fortunately now, I think it's starting to happen that if American home bakers used weights, that would cut out a lot of the stuff that people worry about, or the stuff that people don't understand why their cookies are like paperweights and things like door stops, things like that. Something as simple as getting accustomed to throwing the flour on the scale. That would be helpful.
I'm
And
curious.
to that end, I'm trying to get you all magazine people to be doing that too.
It's an internal discussion. I mean, I'm on your side. I'm actually curious how many. There's this idea that there's just too many people. For some reason, you start talking in grams, and people are going to run away from the recipe. For everyone here, how many people have scales at home and use them? And
For certain things, not so much sugar, although sometimes I do. Well, but see, flour is the thing that makes or breaks, even the extra tablespoon or two. And I mean, my best story about this is my neighbor, she knows me really, really very well. She's not much of a cook. She's a fine cook. She's not much of a baker. And she knows me, and it surprises me. I told her, I asked her to come over one day, and I gave her a measuring cup, and I said, go home, measure a couple flours that you're making cookies with your, granddaughter, and throw it in this bowl and bring it back to me. And she went and she measured with a measuring cup and brought me back, and I weighed it, and it was a huge percentage more flour. I mean, I don't know what she did, sit on it, but that batch of cookies was not going to be delicious if that was going to be a batch of cookies. So to me, that flour ingredient is perhaps the one single most important ingredient that if people would use a scale, they would have better cakes, better cookies. Bread is a slightly different story, but cakes and cookies.
what's funny is actually you work cleaner with a scale.
You do, and I think people don't understand that it takes less dishwashing, less cleaning up.
Yeah, you need fewer measuring cups because it's all just being weighed on a scale.
Somebody said something really interesting to me about it not being a good idea to say using a scale is more accurate because accuracy scares American home cooks. And that was so weird for me, the idea of accuracy. They don't want it to be a science lab. I love accuracy, but she made this very good point that I should never say that. I should say that using a scale is a better communication, and a recipe is a communication. You want to know what I did to get this delicious thing. And if I tell you it's 6 ounces of flour, that's a better communication than saying it's a cup plus, whatever. Because I know your 6 ounces can be the same as my 6 ounces.
Right.
Not that there aren't other variables, but at least we know what amount of flour we used.
Does accuracy seem intimidating? I assume everyone here must be pretty avid bakers or interested in just. You just started?
Oh, a week ago.
Oh, good. Do you have a scale?
I do.
Good.
I have not used it this week, now I will.
Okay. But see, it means though, the problem, it means that everything should be published with weights. Otherwise, no one knows what a cup of flour weighs because even every chef, every cookbook writer measures that flour with a cup differently. So a cup of flour is never just a cup of flour, but if we're all publishing weights, at least we're communicating how much flour.
So may I ask a question?
Sure.
So actually, do you put the cup there first, weigh that cup, and then add it in, and then subtract?
You can,
What's
if
the best way to
you
achieve
see you
that?
don't have to use that measuring cup if you don't want to, you can use any bowl or receptacle. If your scale has a tear on it, you push that button, it zeroes it. So no matter what you put on the scale, you can reset that scale to 0 and you start fresh, you put 6 ounces in. If it goes over, you scoop a little bit out. So that's the brilliance of of the scale is you don't have to have all those separate little devices. You can have a few bowls or what have you. And if you have a recipe that has you adding ingredient after ingredient after ingredient to the same bowl, you can start with that bowl, put in the 6 ounces of flour, press 0, add the next ingredient all into that bowl, presuming those ingredients are supposed to go into the bowl together. So it's really, once you get the hang of it, it's like freedom. It's very liberating.
Now that the fact that I'm new, why, I just
Yeah,
thought
don't
out, so
start on
that's right,
one foot.
that's right.
There's a chicken and egg thing, because then the hard part is also finding the recipes
Yeah,
that give you
so I was
weights.
going to say now that means you all and you all publishing in the publishing community have to start finding recipes with this information, or the whole thing goes to hell.
Well, the pie crust story will have weights. Guaranteed.
That was the prerequisite for doing the story.
I mean, I used to work in restaurants and on the savory side, but I don't know of a chef in the.
So you guys are wild. I mean, you guys will do anything on the savory side. You know, weights and measures are really.
Well, and if you're
very-
cooking, but if even in a restaurant for consistency, there'll be a recipe book in the kitchen, and it's all weight, 100% everything weight.
See, now the question is whether we're going straight to grams without passing through, Years ago, way back in the Marion Cunningham, when Marion Cunningham was starting to publish, she tried using weights and determined that American cooks would never go for it. And people have been quoting her forever and ever. And it's decades since that time now. And my sense of this is that we all have smartphones and we're perfectly comfortable with all this digital stuff. Why is a little scale so scary anymore? I don't think so.
I think it's a great time to open up questions to everyone here. If you have questions, any questions about baking questions from the house?
Answered all the questions. What about chocolate, about recipes, about...
Pie crust recipe, unless you can't tell us. The magazine that it appears, are they going to be rolling it out in plastic wrap, or how are you going to roll it out, turn it around, do all these things?
I'm not sure how we're finally doing this, but are we doing it
I
the...
don't admit that.
We're not. We haven't decided yet? Have we
No,
decided?
every once in a while that you send detailed instructions to a photo shoot how something should be done, and you get all the photos back, and in one of the photos you look and you go,
That's not what we do.
that's not what we. That's not. So they did the traditional
Okay.
fold and transfer. You roll out your pie crust, and typically you're told to fold it in half or quarter so it's easy to move without tearing, and then you unfold it.
So
in
are they
hand.
rolling out on the counter, or are they rolling out on a...
They rolled out
paper?
on counter. But what?
So let me just tell you what I learned in the course of this.
Yeah, please.
So because I was thinking in terms of the scared cook when I was doing this, I actually ended up rolling it out on parchment, but not between two. I decided to get rid of the upper one because it wrinkles a lot of times, and that freaks people out. I can work with it, but I decided to continue this, trying to think like somebody who doesn't think like me and doesn't have all of the experience that I have. So I rolled it out on parchment. I actually let it stick. and I used I lifted the parchment and flipped it over onto the pie pan and then peeled the parchment off. So that you don't have to worry about the pastry breaking, you don't have to fold it. So Anne, you should try this. You should try this.
I'm the one who always, this is too hard, it sticks to the board, and goes there.
No, I think that is a thing that people worry about a lot. And I think it's hard to train somebody to move the pastry every couple turns to keep it from sticking and working out. So anyway, we'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the text has to agree with the photos. So
And we don't know anything about that.
So at the end of the day, all your work may be for naught. because
No, it's-
some photographer is figuring out how you should be making the rest of it.
there's luckily the really really great tips for making the crust are all really perfectly shown in all the photos. That was the one thing that came back without the parchment paper that I was a little bit surprised by.
Funny, right?
Yeah, the photo editors would laugh me
We
out of
do the
the
photo, we love that, don't we?
Do you always use a convection oven or do you
Actually, I don't own a convection oven.
Okay, well, okay, so for nothing, you wouldn't suggest using convection?
No, I can't say I wouldn't suggest, but I have to say that you need to know what your convection oven tells you to do. And it's usually turn the temperature down 25 degrees and look for doneness early, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, but what is the purpose of it? Just to cook it or cook it quicker or?
Convection does cook it quicker, and it's arguably, although I'm not sure the home ones really do this, an evener temperature because it's got air circulating. And I've noticed that some convection ovens have an internal adjustment so that you don't even have to know to turn it down, but you have to know that it has the internal adjustment, right? So, yes.
How do you, problem with an electric oven? And baking. I found
Is that a problem?
It is for a friend of mine, because I guess I brought a recipe, which, I don't know, doesn't it cook faster?
No, convection will, with the air blowing, will cook faster.
An electric, you think it's no
No,
different?
not so much difference, really. It's possible that if she doesn't bake a lot, that maybe her temperatures are off, it's not off, it's too hot, or it's helpful to stick a thermometer in an oven to see if real temperature is anywhere near what it says on the dial. And that's the other thing about baking. I mean, for a savory cook, arguably you can cook a chicken anywhere from 300 degrees to about 500 degrees and still have a pretty good chicken, right? But for baking, you want your oven temperature to be what you think it is. So putting a thermometer in there is really helpful. For me, I have a guy come out, since I feel that it's my duty to at least know what my temperature is since I'm publishing. I have a guy come out and calibrate it once a year or so. I have gas.
I saw your name come up last week in some of the Julia Child celebration memories. Do you have anything you can share with us about your time?
Yeah. Very memorable was the shooting the series Baking at Julia's, which I had an episode with her. First of all, it was organized so that it all took place in her house, which was good. She was advancing in age already at that time, and having the whole thing take place in her house meant that if she needed to go sit down or lie down or get away for a few minutes, she could just go upstairs. But for us, it meant seeing her house where she and Paul had lived. It meant seeing all the various rooms were turned into editing this room and that. I mean, there was a sort of function to a lot of the rooms, the dining room, a bunch of things were going on. Dory Greenspan was upstairs looking at a monitor and taking notes frantically. Anne was probably in and out of there, but I didn't know you or see you at that point. And so anyway, we were in her house and her kitchen was the set. And the way it was scheduled over maybe 6 weeks or so is that you would arrive and you would go straight to the basement where the prep kitchen was, and you would see the monitor, you would see the star of the day up there while you were soldiering away, getting your stuff all ready, and then the next day you would rise up to be the star, and somebody else was downstairs prepping, and then you're out, the next guy's in. So it was kind of wonderful that way. But the thing that I remember was that Julia was such a pro on TV. She'd been doing it so many years. She knew exactly what to do, and she said to me, she said, "Well, dearie," she said, "if you have something to say and you have to run the mixer, say what you have to say and then just be quiet, shut up, and let the mixer run, because we might have to edit there, and we don't want to miss any of your early words," or something to that effect. And she said, "And if you forget, I'll just come over and give you a little nudge, a little kick in the shin." So there was that, but really the thing I remember even more than that was more impressive than that, was that in spite of the fact that there were a zillion helpers around on that set, whenever the cameras stopped rolling, she just instinctively picked up a towel and started to tidy up the counter. It was just so ingrained in her to clean up and to be a part of that team. It was really sensational. Fabulous memory.
What did you make of
What did I make? I made a very elaborate multi-layer cake wrapped in chocolate, a sheet of chocolate with chocolate ruffles. And I think that the series was missing some glamour stuff, and so she called me for that. And I was on vacation for 2 weeks and had a house sitter in my house. There was monitoring phone calls and so forth. And the first 2 phone calls that Julia made to my house in my absence were assumed to be a friend of mine a joke call. There was Julia's voice inviting me to do some TV thing, and this wasn't paid attention to for many, many days. And by the time we got home from France, I think, there had been 3 calls from Julia, hoping that I would be available.
Do you have a favorite baking tool?
Baking tool. I love my KitchenAid mixer, my old KitchenAid mixer. I love a microplane zester. Could not live without it. Baking tool. Can't imagine life without parchment paper.
If you had to recommend an electronic scale that wasn't super high-end,
Yeah.
really reliable.
For less than the cost of 10 lattes, I've been known to say. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. You go into Sur La Table or one of those kinds of stores or online. I think you want something that registers either grams or ounces, and most of them do now with a flick of a switch, because we're still figuring out whether we're going to go to grams or ounces, but I think we're going to go to grams eventually, and it's good to have that, to be able to switch back and forth. And probably you want quarter of an ounce as the smallest, at least a quarter of an ounce, which is, or 5 grams or something as the small measure. Beyond that, look for something that's nice in your kitchen. And batteries, all you need is batteries, and most of them are under, I think you can get a scale for $25, $30. I have a very ugly one that was originally meant to be a postal scale. I've been using it for a long time.
Anybody else? Thank you.
Are you going to sign books?
Love to.
Oh, you have a question?
How do you come up with a recipe? Do you pull that from a basic or a paper recipe and then just make variations on that?
Often a recipe will come from another recipe, and if you've been doing this as long as I do, it might even start with one of mine, and I take it in another direction. Sometimes I make something that's somebody else's, and it is so wonderful, I start thinking, okay, where could this go? So things don't come out of thin air usually, although I love a project where there isn't a lot of basic recipes available, and I can kind of do thin air, but things come off of other things, variations on things, new directions for things, swapping out this, changing that.
So do you know instinctively then how much flour, sugar, or eggs to put in because of the chemistry of it, or?
Well, if I'm starting with something that I know works, then there's already that basic starting point. I did it years and years ago. I did a low-fat one where I tried to cut at least 30% of calories and fat without using any nasty ingredients. So I started out with known recipes, and I just whittled away at them and tried this trick and that trick, and learned as I was going what was supportable and what was not. I'm very empirical. I'm not that scientific. Sometimes I think I'm the, if you let a monkey type for enough years, you'll have a couple sentences. I love trial and error.
What do you do for errors?
Most of my neighbors have long since decided they don't want to eat an awful lot of sweet stuff anymore. I actually store a bunch of stuff in the freezer and give it to the local synagogue feeds the homeless one Sunday a month. When my assistant lived in town, she used to send it with her husband to softball night. That was always good. Sometimes I have to throw it away. Just have to.